Château de Chillon stands today as a perfect vision of medieval romance, an architectural masterpiece of stone and shadow rising directly from the turquoise waters of Lake Geneva, surrounded by the serene majesty of the Swiss Alps. It is a scene of breathtaking tranquility, a picturesque postcard of European history. Yet, this idyllic setting conceals a history of profound political cruelty, torture, and silence of darkness that captured the imagination of the Romantic era and birthed one of the world's most enduring legends of political martyrdom. The central pillar of Chillon's fame rests upon a single, grim cell in the name of one man, François de Bonivard. He was a political and religious adversary of the powerful House of Savoy, imprisoned in the castle's dungeon for 6 agonizing years. His story, dramatic enough in its own right, was seized upon by the great English poet, Lord Byron, who transformed the historical figure into a universal symbol of defiance against tyranny. But what if the man who inspired the immortal poem was not the hollow-eyed martyr Byron depicted? What if the romanticized suffering that draws millions of visitors to Chillon's cold vaults is, in fact, a magnificent, beautiful fabrication of poetic license that obscures a far more complex and brutal historical truth? To truly understand the curse and the blessing of Chillon Castle, we must look beyond the tourists and the perfect alpine views and descend into the cold stone reality of its dungeons, where the line between historical fact and literary fiction is permanently blurred. The castle's strategic importance, and thus its capacity for brutal confinement, was dictated entirely by its unique geography. Chillon sits on a small rocky island directly on the edge of Lake Geneva, controlling the vital passage between northern and southern Europe through the Alpine Pass. It was built not for aesthetics, but for unyielding control. For centuries, the castle was a formidable stronghold of the powerful Counts of Savoy. Its function was threefold. Fiscal control. It was a lucrative toll station, taxing all goods, armies, and travelers moving between Italy and the rest of Europe. Military defense. It was a crucial garrison protecting the Savoy territories. Political prison. Its dark, subterranean vaults served as an essential tool for neutralizing political and religious enemies of the ruling dynasty. The dungeons, known as the subterranean halls, are not simply atmospheric medieval cells. They are chambers carved directly into the bedrock of the island. They are perpetually damp, cold, and dark, designed to ensure that the prisoners were isolated not just from society, but from all human comfort, often submerged in stagnant water that rose and fell with the lake's level. It is here that the castle's true, documented horrors unfolded, entirely separate from the romantic tragedy of The real François de Bonivard was an educated, highly articulate, and deeply political man at the passive victim often portrayed. Born into a noble family, he became the prior of St. Victor, a monastery near Geneva, in the early 16th century. His conflict with the House of Savoy was political and ideological, centering on his staunch support for Geneva's independence and, later, his embrace of the Protestant Reformation. Bonivard actively opposed the Duke of Savoy, Charles III, who saw Geneva as a strategic piece of territory to be absorbed. In 1530, after a failed attempt to flee, Bonivard was captured by Savoyard forces and subsequently incarcerated in His confinement was undeniably brutal. For 6 years, he endured the damp, cold darkness of the castle's subterranean prison. He was chained to a pillar in the second vault, a pillar that remains in the dungeon to this day, marked by the alleged footprints of his pacing. This 6-year period of isolation and uncertainty was his ordeal, the unvarnished historical truth of his suffering. The moment of his freedom came not through divine intervention or a poetic rescue, but through geopolitics. In 1536, the Bernese, powerful rivals of Savoy and allies of Geneva, invaded Viaux and successfully besieged Chillon. The castle was taken, and the first act of the liberating forces was to descend into the dungeons and free the political prisoners. Bonivard, severely weakened but alive, was brought blinking into the sunlight, having survived the ordeal. Crucially, the historical Bonivard story does not end there. He went on to become a respected historian of Geneva, married 4 times, and led a long, active life dedicated to the new Protestant cause. He was a political survivor and a scholar. His imprisonment was a chapter of suffering, but not the entirety of his identity. The historical truth of Bonivard, political scholar who lived to tell his tale, is fascinating, but it was not compelling enough for the Romantic Age. It took the visit of a heartbroken, disillusioned English poet to transform Bonivard's story into a global legend. In 1816, Lord Byron toured Europe, fleeing scandal and seeking inspiration amidst the backdrop of revolutionary ideals. He visited Chillon, descending into the dark vaults, where the atmosphere of political repression and forgotten suffering immediately resonated with his own sense of rebellion and persecution. It was during this visit that Byron, in an act of artistic vandalism that would later become a priceless historical artifact, carved his own name into the pillar to which Bonivard was chained. Inspired by the setting and the story, Byron penned the narrative poem, The Prisoner of Chillon. This poem is the single greatest reason for the castle's worldwide fame. But it is also the origin of the beautiful lie. Byron made several profound, deliberate changes to the historical facts to serve his poetic and political ends. The martyrdom. Byron transformed Bonivard into a martyr for religious and political freedom, a victim who watched his 6 brothers die one by one, succumbing to despair, until he was left as the sole, broken survivor. The historical Bonivard had no such brothers imprisoned with him. The final state. In the poem, Bonivard is so broken by isolation that when he is finally freed, he finds that he has grown to love his solitude. He views the outside world with detachment and is tragically unable to reconnect with humanity. This literary ending, a man psychologically destroyed by tyranny, is far more tragic and resonant than the historical reality of the man who became a historian and married 4 times. Universal symbolism. Byron took Bonivard's specific political struggle against the House of Savoy and turned it into a grand, universal statement against all forms of oppression and tyranny. Byron's poem, an immediate sensation across Europe, did not just popularize Chillon, it fundamentally rewrote its history, creating a fictional martyr that was more tragic, more noble, and ultimately, more politically useful than the real person. The tragedy of the poetic lie is that by focusing so intensely on the romanticized suffering of Bonivard, the public often overlooks the documented, unromantic horrors that truly took place in the castle's dungeons. The cold, damp vaults were not exclusively reserved for noble political dissidents like Bonivard. The castle's history is scarred by the use of torture and the imprisonment of ordinary people accused of lesser crimes, or the countless nameless souls caught in the wider political conflicts. Historical accounts confirm that the dungeon complex included areas specifically designed for interrogation and torture, where various painful methods were used to extract confessions. The chapel tower and other smaller cells bear witness to the brutal, state-sanctioned violence that the House of Savoy employed to maintain control over the region. The conditions were so poor, the lack of light so absolute, and the proximity to the lake so chilling, that disease and madness were inevitable outcomes for those confined there. The truth is, while Bonivard's 6-year ordeal was severe, he was a political prisoner of status. He was likely treated better than the scores of common criminals and perceived heretics who were subjected to far harsher, undocumented fates within those same cold stones. The poetic focus on one famous prisoner allows the vast, anonymous suffering of the many to fade into the background. Today, when tourists descend the winding stone stairs into the subterranean halls of Château de Chillon, they are seeking the ghost of the man Lord Byron invented. They seek the solitary pillar, marked by Byron's graffiti, where the historical truth of Bonivard is permanently eclipsed by the power of poetry. The final verdict on Chillon is clear. The castle is not just a historical site, it is a profound monument to the triumph of literary myth over historical fact. Bonivard's story is a powerful testament to survival, political conviction, and the enduring human spirit. But Lord Byron, through the transformative power of art, leveraged that suffering to create a universal martyrous symbol of defiance that resonated with a revolutionary world. Chillon Castle stands beautiful and brutal, a stunning reminder that sometimes the most successful legends are not those that stick strictly to the facts, but those that capture a deep, essential human truth about freedom, suffering, and the eternal fight against the darkness of tyranny. The castle endures, not because of the strategic toll it collected, but because of the timeless tragedy written on its walls by a poet fleeing his own demons,